UK taxpayers' money is being used to fund Nigel Farage's Reform UK through arms sales, and I'm not talking about Nigel Farage's salary as an MP. In a Byline Times investigation that reveals the full extent of how taxpayer-funded arms contracts are helping bankroll Reform UK's political ambitions, we report that Christopher Harborne, the single largest shareholder, has donated at least 13.7 million to Reform UK and a further £1 million to Boris Johnson. The company is almost entirely dependent on UK government funding, with more than 80% of its arms-related revenue derived from Ministry of Defence contracts. As if that wasn't bad enough, it helps Israel out as well. Their fortunes appear to have boosted by recent global conflicts. Its revenue under contract increased by 200 million in 2024, a rise that coincides with intensified global arms exports to the Middle East and Israel. Critics argue this raises urgent ethical concerns, particularly given the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office's own guidelines on military exports to repressive regimes. It is important to highlight because Trump's attempts to divide the world are indirectly benefiting his allies, like Nigel Farage and the arms companies who back them. Meanwhile, Reform called to introduce incentives and tax breaks to boost the UK's defence industry. And now we find out that they are being paid massive sums by millionaire arms dealers who will directly benefit from increases in defence spending and tax breaks for arms companies. So, Lewis, let me ask you, what do you think that this tells us about Reform UK and what they might do to increase arms races around the world? Should the arms industry be entirely publicly owned and democratically controlled to help stop this kind of corruption?
The thing is, the arms industry, everybody's literally connected to it. We have people in the Tory party, we have people in Labour. Luke Akehurst triggered, everybody's triggered in chat because everybody hates Luke Akehurst. He used to work for an arms lobby, the same company actually that Priti Patel worked for. There are all these connections. And obviously now Reform have their connections too. And this is the thing that we need to be careful about. I don't necessarily think it's about, whether things have to be public or private. I think it is just about who can donate and who can control things and who can influence things. And I think certain industries do need to be separated in lots of ways. And an example of that is actually Luke Akehurst. If anybody wants to, because they're, boring like I am, I check regularly what questions MPs submit to Parliament because they have parliamentary privilege. They can send a letter to the minister for whatever and ask for very specific information, and they have to give them it unless it's like covered by national security. And Mr. Luke Akehurst, or as some people like to call him, Nuke Akehurst, you can Google that. I'm not going to explain it. He constantly asks questions about weapons. Like, he is not on any committee which is related to weapons. He's not on any committee he's got no role that's related to defence. He used to be a defence lobbyist. Now he was working in the Labour government, and he's very powerful. And all he does is submit questions to the government about the Apache helicopter or this type of arms system and all of this type of stuff. And I want to know, where is this information going? Why is he asking these questions? And you can ask these questions everywhere, and the same with Reform. The only reason why an arms dealer, an arms backer, an arms creator, whatever they're called, are going to be backing Reform, it's because they want something. And this is what it always comes down to. And it's very interesting, isn't it, that as things are ramping up around the world and everybody's increasing their spending, we're going to see a lot more companies and a lot more people like this guy who's funding Reform be throwing their money around, because it's a very, very rich industry. It's a very powerful industry, and it's very influential. Obviously, as you said as well, like, Israel are going to benefit from this. People already knew that anyway, because Israel has a huge defense industry. And this is what happens when things change in the world. These people will always benefit from these things. I don't necessarily, again, think it's about making things public or private. I think it just comes back to taxing. Let's tax these people so much so they can't even fucking donate to these parties at such a length where they've got influence. And again, it's always about a deal. There is something that guy wants, and he will probably get it if Reform wins, because that's unfortunately how these things work. We should go back to Labour's plan. Let's remind people, Labour's plan, which they've gone back on apparently because of Lord Ali, according to some reporting, they were going to limit donations to £100,000. You couldn't donate more than that. So maybe if we talk about bringing those things back, we can actually get rid of the influence, or at least reduce it in politics. But until then, nothing's really going to change.
I kind of think what it highlights as well is that it exposes how state power is being leveraged to enrich a tiny elite under the guise of national security. And I think that's what worries me. And I do think it's a bit of a scandal, but it also highlights the structural feature of capitalism in its imperialist stage. And that's a frightening concept. But it is ironic that Reform UK are kind of behind this. Like, as a political party, they always cynically talk about British independence and the importance of that from European defence funding. whilst taking money from weapons. Um, I, I don't know. There's a huge contradiction there, and I think it tells us that reforms UK's nationalism is hollow. It's not about sovereignty, and I think we've kind of noticed that a long time ago. But it's about securing capital for a specific class of warmongering profiteers. So I don't know. I think you're absolutely right. Taxing is probably the best way forward, but I do think it needs to be taken entirely. Take it out of private hands completely. I think it's absolutely obscene that weapons of mass destruction, weapons that are tools of mass killings, are produced for private profit. So public ownership under democratic control would in some way ensure that that weapons manufacturing is subject to some sort of ethical scrutiny. But I find that when it's not in the hands of a democracy, then it kind of evades that. We've seen how international law doesn't really get applied properly. Like people are constantly going against it.
Exactly, and obviously as well, we've got so many reports. We know that the UK government, regardless of who's controlling the weapons, right? Like, put that aside. We know if let's say we did actually, if we controlled the weapons, we'd still be selling them to Israel, right? Because the UK government specifically carved out 5 licenses that they said were breaking or potentially in breach of humanitarian law and war crimes and all that type of stuff, and they specifically kept them open because they were afraid that they would get retaliated against on the US government. So it doesn't really matter, is it? We've had people quit government. We've had whistleblowers quit government because we continue to sell these arms deals, and we've got the intelligence to say they're using them to do bad things. Even when Anthony Blinken was obviously under Joe Biden's administration, there were people who quit. There were people who were whistleblowers saying that the reports that we're getting saying that Israel is doing very bad things, and they still kept selling the weapons to them. So even if we want to talk about taking weapons out of private companies, how does that even help anyway when the governments that we have don't care about these international laws, don't care about what is happening right now? We've got, 5 major reports from human rights organizations, international, very reputable, saying everything from apartheid, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. So I'm not saying what does it matter, none of it matters, but at the same time, it's just frustrating because we can come up with these ideas to be more moral and more principled and try and reduce influence in politics. But ultimately, even when we create those structures, people just find a way around them anyway. And this is what makes me really sad. It's like, how can we empower people? How can we create a better system where these things simply cannot be abused?
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.